The trade dome on Cinder Station smelled like burnt metal and old rain. Daniel Voss walked through it slowly, a data pad tucked under one arm, watching the crowd of alien traders argue over crates of blue grain. He was not important here. He was just a logistics officer, the kind of man who counted boxes and signed forms. But today, the counting could wait, because the Red Hari were putting on a show. A ring of iron poles stood in the center of the dome, wrapped in chains that glowed faintly with heat. Around it, dozens of species had gathered, drawn by rumors that traveled faster than light through the station's gossip channels. In the middle of the ring stood 3 Red Hari soldiers, tall and gray-skinned, their muscles corded like rope under armor plating. They were smiling. One of them, a broad soldier with a scar across his jaw, picked up a length of burning chain with his bare hand. The crowd gasped. He did not. He simply held it, turned it over, and let it drop. The skin on his palm blackened, but his face calm as still water. Another soldier drew a blade across his own forearm, deep enough to draw blood, and did not blink. Daniel stopped near the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, saying nothing. He had read about this before boarding the station 3 months ago. The Red Hari called it painproofing. It was not just training. It was surgery, drugs, ritual, and years of forced exposure, all designed to strip away the nerves that told a body when it was being hurt. To the Red Hari, pain was proof of weakness. A species that flinched was a species that could be conquered. Braxis Kell, the Red Hari commander overseeing the trade talks, stepped into the ring. He was older than the soldiers, with silver markings tattooed down the sides of his neck, each one a record of some old wound he no longer felt. He raised a hand, and the crowd quieted. "This is why the Dominion does not kneel," Braxis said, his voice carrying easily through the dome. "Pain is a tool for the weak to measure fear. We remove the tool. We remove the fear." He turned his head, and his eyes found Daniel standing at the edge of the crowd. "The humans wish to sit at our table. Perhaps they should first show us what they are made of." A ripple of laughter moved through the nearby Red Hari soldiers. Daniel did not laugh. He did not look away either. He simply studied Braxis the way he studied a supply manifest, looking for the numbers that didn't add up. Priya Anand, the station's medic, appeared at his side, her arms full of a small crate of medical supplies she had been sorting nearby. She was human too, sharp-eyed, and quick to worry about her crewmates. "You're not planning to say anything to that, are you?" she asked quietly. "Not yet," Daniel said. "Good. Because that man just held burning metal like it was a warm mug of tea." Daniel finally allowed himself a small, tired smile. He didn't feel it. That's different from being strong. Priya frowned at him, unsure what he meant, but there was no time to ask further. Isvara Thran, a Red Hari noble dressed in dark robes stitched with silver thread, stepped forward from the crowd. She was not a soldier, but her voice held its own kind of weight, the kind that came from political power rather than muscle. "The humans hide behind their machines and their treaties," Isvara said, addressing the crowd but clearly speaking to Daniel. "They speak of trade and peace, yet they have never shown us anything of their own strength. Perhaps their flesh is as soft as their words." The crowd murmured. Some of the alien traders from other worlds shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension rising. Cinder Station was neutral ground, watched over by observers from the Trade Concord, a loose alliance of species that kept order between rival powers. A representative from the Concord, a thin, quiet being wrapped in a silver cloak, stood near the back of the dome, watching everything without expression. Daniel finally stepped forward, out of the crowd and into the open space near the ring. The soldiers turned to look at him, amused. He was not tall like they were, not covered in old scars turned pale and numb. He was just a man in a plain uniform, hands empty at his sides. "You misunderstand something," Daniel said, his voice calm, carrying just far enough to be heard. "Feeling nothing is not the same as being strong. It just means you can't tell when something is wrong." Braxis's smile faded slightly, replaced by something colder. "Careful, human. Words are easy to say. The trial of endurance is not." "Then let's find out," Daniel said. A silence spread across the dome, heavier than before. Priya reached out and gripped his arm, but Daniel did not move. Isvara's eyes narrowed, studying him with new interest, as if seeing him for the first time. The Concord observer in the silver cloak finally stepped forward, its voice smooth and even. If both sides agree, the trial of endurance will be recognized and witnessed. The results will be broadcast to all client worlds under Concord law. The observer paused, looking between Daniel and Braxis. Do both sides accept? Braxis laughed, low and confident, already imagining the humiliation to come. The Dominion accepts. All eyes turned to Daniel. He thought of the months of careful diplomacy, the trade routes that depended on this station staying peaceful, and the quiet certainty in his own chest that came from something the Red Hari would never understand. He nodded once. Humanity accepts, he said. The dome erupted into noise, alien voices rising all around them, but Daniel barely heard it. He was already thinking about what came next and what it would take to survive it. Word of the trial spread across Syndra Station faster than any cargo ship could travel. By the time night cycle lights dimmed the dome's ceiling, every trader, diplomat, and dockworker on the station had heard about the human who agreed to face a Red Hari champion in the old blood sport of endurance. Some called it foolish. Others called it a death sentence dressed up as diplomacy. Inside the small human quarters near the docking ring, Daniel sat at a metal table, staring at a cup of cold tea he had forgotten to drink. Priya paced back and forth in front of him, her arms crossed tightly, her voice sharp with worry. Do you understand what you just agreed to? She asked. The Red Hari have spent centuries turning their bodies into things that don't feel damage. You just told them you'd match that with nothing but stubbornness. I know what I agreed to, Daniel said quietly. Then explain it to me, because right now it sounds like you just signed away your life to prove a point to a room full of strangers. Daniel finally looked up at her. He wasn't smiling, but there was something steady in his eyes, the same look he got when a supply chain fell apart, and everyone else panicked while he quietly found the fix. It's not about proving a point to them, he said. It's about what happens if I don't. If I back down now, every client world watching this broadcast will believe the Red Hari were right. That we're weak. That we don't belong at their table. That kind of belief spreads faster than any treaty can stop it. Priya sat down across from him, some of the anger draining out of her, replaced by something closer to fear. You could die trying to prove otherwise. I could, Daniel admitted. But I don't plan to. Before she could argue further, the door chime sounded. Priya opened it to find Isvara Thren standing outside, alone, without her usual guards. The noble stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her dark robes brushing against the doorframe. I wanted to see the human who thinks pain means nothing, Isvara said, studying Daniel with open curiosity now instead of scorn. I never said pain means nothing, Daniel replied. I said feeling nothing doesn't make you strong. Isvara tilted her head, clearly turning the words over in her mind. Explain. Daniel gestured to the empty chair across from him, and after a moment's hesitation, Isvara sat. Pain is information, he said. It tells your body something is wrong before real damage happens. If you cut off that information, you don't become tougher. You just become blind to your own injuries until it's too late to fix them. The Dominion has used painproofing for 300 years, Isvara said. Our soldiers fight through wounds that would cripple other species. And how many of them die from injuries they never noticed until it was too late? Daniel asked. Isvara's jaw tightened, and for a moment she said nothing. It was clear the question struck somewhere she didn't like. That is not something openly discussed among my people, she finally admitted. It should be, Daniel said, not unkindly. Because tomorrow, you're going to see the difference for yourself. Isvara studied him a moment longer, then rose from her chair. Doran Kesh will be your opponent. He is young, but he has passed every painproofing trial the Dominion has ever devised. He has never lost an endurance contest. Then he'll have a good record going into tomorrow, Daniel said evenly. Isvara almost smiled at that, though she caught herself before it fully formed. You are either very brave or very foolish, human. Most days, I can't tell the difference either, Daniel replied. After she left, Priya rubbed her temples and looked at him. You're really doing this. I already agreed. Backing out now would be worse than losing. The next morning, the trade dome had been transformed. The iron ring from the day before was gone, replaced with a raised platform surrounded by monitoring equipment brought in by the Concord observers. Cameras hovered in the air, ready to broadcast the trial to every client world under Red Hari influence. Braxis stood near the platform, arms crossed, watching the crowd gather with clear satisfaction. Dorian Kesh climbed onto the platform first. He was younger than Daniel expected, lean but powerfully built, his gray skin marked with the pale lines of old painproofing scars. He looked at Daniel with something close to pity, as if he already knew how this would end. "You did not have to do this," Dorian said, not unkindly. "The Dominion respects courage, even in a losing effort." "I appreciate that," Daniel said. "But I'm not planning on losing." Dorian's eyes narrowed slightly, some flicker of doubt crossing his face before it disappeared behind practiced calm. The Concord observer stepped onto the platform, its silver cloak catching the dome's light. The trial of endurance will consist of 3 stages, each testing a different measure of tolerance and function under pain. All results will be recorded and witnessed. Do both competitors understand the terms? "Understood," Dorian said. "Understood," Daniel said. Braxis's voice rang out from the crowd, confident and mocking. "Let the humans learn what true strength looks like." Daniel took a slow breath, feeling his heartbeat steady despite the noise around him. He thought of Priya's worried face, of Isvara's unexpected question, of every quiet fact he had learned about the Retheries painproofing over the months he had spent studying them. He wasn't afraid of pain. He had simply never needed a body that couldn't feel it. What he needed was a mind that could work through it. The first stage was about to begin. A low hum filled the trade dome as the first stage's equipment powered on. 2 metal cuffs rose from the platform floor, one in front of Daniel and one in front of Dorian, each connected to a thick cable that ran down into a control unit monitored by a Concord technician. The cuffs would apply pressure, heat, and controlled electric current, all measured precisely and increased in stages, while both competitors were required to complete a simple task, assembling a small mechanical device, without stopping. Priya stood near the edge of the platform with the other observers, her hands clenched at her sides. She had argued against this trial for hours the night before, but Daniel had made his decision, and now all she could do was watch. The Concord observer raised a thin hand. "Begin." Both cuffs closed around the competitor's wrists at the same moment. Daniel felt the pressure first, a tight squeeze that quickly turned to a dull ache, followed by rising heat that spread up his forearm like he'd placed it too close to a stove. He grit his teeth and reached for the small pile of mechanical parts in front of him, forcing his fingers to work despite the growing discomfort. Dorian, across from him, showed nothing. His face remained still, his hands steady as he assembled his own device piece by piece, moving with practiced calm. To the crowd watching, it looked like an easy victory already forming. Whispers spread through the dome, some laughing quietly at the sight of Daniel's furrowed brow and tense jaw. The heat in the cuffs increased. Daniel's hand trembled slightly as he fit a small gear into place, sweat beading on his forehead. He did not stop. He breathed through his nose, slow and controlled, focusing on each small motion, ignoring the part of his mind screaming to pull his hand away. "Look at him struggle," one of the Rethari soldiers muttered from the crowd, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Isvara Thrin, standing near the front with Braxis, was not laughing. Her eyes were fixed on a small display screen mounted beside the platform, showing real-time data from both competitors: heart rate, task completion speed, motor precision. She frowned slightly, something catching her attention. The electric current activated next, a sharp jolt that ran through both cuffs at timed intervals. Daniel flinched visibly, his whole arm jerking for a half-second before he forced himself back into rhythm, fingers moving again. Dorian did not flinch at all. His hands never paused. To anyone simply watching faces, it looked like the Rethari champion was untouched while the human suffered. But Isvara kept watching the display screen instead. Dorian's task completion speed had begun to slow, almost too slightly to notice, a few fractions of a second lost between each piece he assembled. His precision readings, tracking small errors in movement, had ticked upward twice already. Daniel's numbers, despite his visible strain, had not changed at all. His task completion speed remained steady. His precision stayed locked in place, piece after piece fitting together correctly despite the sweat running down his face and the tight line of his jaw. The current increased again, sharper this time. Daniel let out a short, controlled breath through his teeth, a sound of clear discomfort, but his hands did not stop moving. He finished his device with a final click and set it down on the platform exactly as the countdown timer reached 0. A second later, Dorian finished his as well, his face as calm and unreadable as it had been from the start. The Concord observer studied both devices, then the data screens. Stage 1 complete. Both competitors have finished within acceptable parameters. The crowd murmured, many still convinced the trial was already decided in the referee's favor. Braxis wore a satisfied look, arms crossed, clearly certain of the outcome. But Isvara stepped closer to the display screen, studying the numbers more carefully now, her earlier confidence replaced with something more careful. She approached Daniel as the cuffs released, and technicians moved in to check both competitors before the next stage began. Daniel flexed his reddened wrist slowly, wincing slightly at the movement, but otherwise composed. "You showed pain on your face," Isvara said, watching him closely. "Yet your task never slowed." His face showed nothing, yet his numbers slipped. "That's the part your people don't measure," Daniel said, breathing evenly now that the trial had paused. "You watch faces. You should be watching results." Isvara's eyes flicked toward Dorian, who stood a short distance away, flexing his own numbed wrist without any visible reaction, unaware or unconcerned by the faint tremor Isvara had noticed in his fingers moments earlier. "He does not feel the strain building in his hand," Isvara murmured, almost to herself. "No," Daniel said. "He doesn't. And that's not always a gift." Braxis approached, clearly annoyed by the pause and celebration. "The stage is complete. Move to the next trial." The Concord observer nodded, gesturing for the platform to be reset for stage 2, something involving physical labor and mounting environmental strain. Priya moved quickly to Daniel's side, checking his wrist with practiced hands, her expression tight with concern. "You're already exhausted," she whispered. "And this was just the first stage." "I know," Daniel said quietly. "But watch him. Really watch him. He's not as untouched as everyone thinks." Priya glanced toward Dorian, who stood tall and confident among the cheering Redhari soldiers, utterly unaware of the small, growing cracks that Isvara Thren had just begun to notice. The platform reset with a low mechanical groan, and the second stage loomed ahead. The trade dome's floor shifted and reformed for the second stage, panels sliding apart to reveal a jagged path of broken terrain built from rock, twisted metal, and uneven steps, stretching nearly 50 meters across the platform. Heavy packs waited at the starting line, each one loaded with dense supply crates meant to simulate battlefield conditions. The task was simple in words but brutal in practice. Carry the load across the terrain without stopping, while pain-inducing stimulus continued through wearable cuffs strapped to both competitors' legs. Daniel rolled his shoulders, testing the weight of the pack as a technician fastened the cuffs around his calves. The device would deliver pulses of pressure and heat with every step, designed to simulate the strain of a forced march under injury. Dorian stood a few meters away, having his own cuffs fitted, his expression as calm as ever. Priya crouched near Daniel, adjusting the straps on his pack with quick, careful hands. "Your legs are already tired from the first stage," she said quietly. "This is going to be worse." "I know," Daniel said, "but I can feel exactly how tired I am. That matters more than it sounds." Priya didn't fully understand what he meant, but there wasn't time to ask. The Concord observer raised its hand once more. "Stage 2. Begin." Both competitors stepped onto the broken terrain at the same moment. The cuffs activated immediately, sending sharp pulses of heat down Daniel's shins with every step he took. He winced, adjusting his stride almost instantly, shifting his weight to avoid placing too much pressure on a spot where the pulse landed hardest. It slowed him slightly, but it kept him steady. Dorian moved differently. He walked at a brisk, confident pace, his numbed legs registering nothing from the pulses at all. To the crowd, it looked like he was pulling ahead easily, his stride long and sure, while Daniel limped carefully behind him, adjusting constantly to the discomfort in his legs. "The human falls behind already," a Redhari soldier called out from the crowd, drawing laughter from those nearby. Braxis smiled, watching Dorian's clear lead with open satisfaction. Isvara, however, kept her attention on the display screen once more, watching a smaller reading tucked beneath the main data feed. Minor structural stress building in Dorian's left leg, a stress reading rising steadily with every heavy step he took across the uneven terrain. Dorian did not slow down. He could not feel the small twist in his ankle from an awkward landing on a loose rock a few steps earlier. He could not feel the way his own weight, combined with the pack's load, was straining a joint that had already been quietly weakened. His body's warning system, the one built to protect him, had been surgically silenced years ago in the name of strength. Daniel, meanwhile, felt every uneven stone beneath his boots, every jolt of heat from the cuffs, every ache building in his calves. He hated it, but he used it. Each twinge of pain told him exactly where to place his next step, exactly how much weight to shift, exactly when to slow down before a misstep became a real injury. It was slower. It was harder, but it was controlled. Halfway across the terrain, Doran's leg buckled. It happened fast. One moment his stride steady and sure, the next his ankle rolling hard on an uneven rock, the joint already weakened from the stress he never felt building. He stumbled, catching himself against a jagged piece of metal, his face finally showing the faintest flicker of confusion rather than pain. He looked down at his leg, clearly registering that something was wrong only because his balance had failed, not because his body had warned him. The crowd fell silent for a moment, the earlier laughter fading into confused murmurs. Isvara stepped closer to the platform's edge, her eyes fixed on Doran's leg. He didn't know, she said quietly, almost to herself. He didn't feel it happening. Braxis's confident expression faltered slightly, though he quickly masked it. He will recover. Redhari soldiers do not stop for minor injuries. Doran forced himself upright, adjusting his pack and continuing forward, though his stride was noticeably uneven now, favoring the injured leg without fully understanding why. Without pain to guide him, he could not properly compensate, placing just as much weight on the weakened joint as before, worsening the injury with every step. Daniel, several meters behind, watched this happen and understood exactly what was going wrong. He didn't call out. There was no rule against Doran continuing, and stopping to explain would cost him the trial. Instead, he focused on his own steady, careful progress, letting his body's honest signals guide him safely across the remaining terrain. By the time Daniel reached the end of the path, sweat soaked through his uniform and his legs trembling with real exhaustion, Doran had already finished, several minutes ahead, though he now stood with his weight shifted awkwardly onto one side, his damaged leg clearly unstable beneath him even if he couldn't fully feel why. The Concord observers studied the results. Stage 2 complete. Competitor Doran Kesh finished first. However, medical scans indicate significant joint damage sustained during the stage. A ripple of surprised murmurs spread through the crowd. Priya rushed forward to check Daniel, who sank down onto a supply crate, breathing hard but steady, his legs sore but functional. Isvara approached Braxis, her voice low but firm enough for those nearby to hear. He completed the stage faster, but he is damaged in a way he doesn't understand. The human is slower, but intact. Braxis said nothing, his jaw tight, watching as Redhari medics moved in to examine Doran's leg, the young champion still looking faintly confused by the sudden, unexplained failure of a body that had never betrayed him before. The final stage was next, and it would be the most dangerous of all. A short recovery period was granted before the final stage, though it was hardly enough time for either competitor to truly rest. Redhari medics worked quickly on Doran's leg, wrapping the joint in a stabilizing brace and injecting a compound meant to reduce swelling. Doran sat still through the treatment, watching his own leg with an unfamiliar unease, as if seeing a stranger's limb attached to his body. In the human quarters nearby, Priya knelt in front of Daniel, checking his legs and the reddened marks left by the cuffs. "You can still stop this," she said, though she already knew what he would say. "I'm not stopping," Daniel replied, wincing slightly as she pressed a cool patch against his calf. "We're close." "Close to what?" "Collapsing." "Close to them understanding," Daniel said. "Doran doesn't even know how badly he's hurt right now. That's the whole point I'm trying to make." Priya sighed, but said nothing more, finishing her work in silence. When both competitors returned to the platform, the trade dome had changed once more. A sealed chamber now stood at its center, its walls made of thick, reinforced glass, allowing the crowd outside to watch everything happening within. Inside, a complex mechanical console waited, covered in damaged wiring and broken components that would need to be repaired correctly to complete the final task. The chamber's environmental systems, controlled remotely by Concord technicians, would gradually increase heat, thin the air, and release a mild fatigue-inducing compound into the enclosed space, all designed to simulate the chaos of a real emergency repair under battlefield stress. The final stage will test not only endurance, the Concorde observer announced to the crowd, but function under compounding physical strain. Both competitors must complete the repair task before the chamber's failsafe activates or before either competitor is physically unable to continue. Braxis stepped closer to the chamber's glass wall, his earlier confidence returning now that the stage was about to begin. "This ends here," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "No amount of clever pacing will save the human from what's coming." Daniel and Doran entered the chamber together, the heavy doors sealing shut behind them with a hiss. The console sat between them, wires and broken components scattered across its surface, waiting to be reconnected in the correct sequence. The heat began rising almost immediately, a slow, creeping warmth that thickened the air within minutes. Daniel felt sweat forming along his back as he knelt beside the console, carefully studying the tangled wiring before starting to sort through it. Doran worked quickly beside him, his numbed body unaffected by the rising temperature, his hands moving with practiced speed as he began reconnecting components. For a while, it seemed Doran's advantage would hold. He worked fast, untouched by the heat that made Daniel's hands slippery with sweat, unaffected by the thinning air that made each breath slightly harder to draw. But the fatigue compound released into the chamber's air worked differently than heat or pressure. It didn't target the skin. It targeted the muscles directly, causing a slow buildup of exhaustion that no amount of numbed nerves could hide. Daniel felt at first a growing heaviness in his arms, his fingers slower to respond than before. He recognized the sensation immediately, understanding what was happening to his body, and adjusted his pace, resting his hands for brief seconds between each connection, forcing himself to breathe slowly despite the thinning air, rationing his strength carefully like a man stretching out the last of a dwindling supply. Doran, feeling nothing from the compound building steadily in his muscles, continued working at his original pace, unaware that his own strength was draining far faster than he realized. His hands, though still moving quickly, had begun trembling slightly, a sign his body should have been screaming at him to notice, if only it still could. Outside the chamber, Isvara watched the data screens closely, her expression tightening with each passing minute. "His readings are dropping faster than the humans," she said quietly to Braxis. "He doesn't know it's happening." Braxis said nothing, his eyes fixed on the glass, his earlier confidence slowly fading into something closer to concern. Inside the chamber, Doran reached for a final component, his hand shaking now visibly, though his face still showed nothing. He tried to fit the piece into place, missed the connection once, then twice, his fingers no longer responding the way they always had. Without warning, his legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed onto the chamber floor, his body finally failing in a way his mind had no warning for at all. Daniel, working slowly but steadily beside him, saw Doran fall, but did not stop his own careful pace. He couldn't help him without abandoning the task, and stopping now would waste the only advantage he had left. He rationed his breathing, ignored the burning ache spreading through his arms, and forced his trembling fingers to complete one final connection. The console lit up with a soft hum, the repair complete just as the chamber's environmental alarms began flashing red, signaling the failsafe was about to trigger. The heavy door hissed open, releasing the thick air as medics rushed inside to reach Doran, still unconscious on the floor. Daniel remained kneeling beside the console for a moment, breathing hard, every muscle in his body aching in a way that told him clearly just how close he had come to his own limit. The Concorde observer stepped forward, studying the final readings from both competitors with careful, deliberate attention. "The repair task has been completed by competitor Daniel Voss," the observer announced, its voice carrying clearly through the now silent dome. Competitor Doran Kesh was rendered unable to continue due to undetected physical collapse. By the terms of the trial of endurance, the human delegation is declared the winner. A stunned silence spread through the crowd, broken only by the quiet hum of the chamber's cooling systems and the distant sound of medics working to revive Doran on the platform floor. The trade dome remained unusually quiet in the hours after the trial ended, the usual noise of arguing traders replaced by low, uncertain murmurs. Doran had been carried away by Red Hari medics, stable but shaken, his body recovering from exhaustion and joint damage he had never once felt coming. Daniel sat on the edge of the platform, a thin blanket draped over his shoulders, sipping water Priya had brought him while she checked his vitals one final time. "You look terrible," Priya said, though there was relief in her voice now instead of worry. "I feel terrible," Daniel admitted, managing a tired smile. "But I'm still standing." "Barely," Priya said, though she smiled back. Across the dome, Braxis stood alone near the chamber, staring at the empty console where the trial had ended. The confidence he had worn since the moment the trial began was gone, replaced by something quieter, more thoughtful. The broadcast had already reached every client world under Red Hari influence, showing the same footage over and over, a human kneeling exhausted but victorious beside a Red Hari champion who had collapsed without ever knowing he was in danger. Isvara Thrin approached Daniel once the last of the medical checks were finished, her earlier scorn completely gone now, replaced by careful curiosity. "May I ask you something?" she said. Daniel nodded, gesturing for her to sit if she wished. She remained standing instead. "You could have asked for your own body to be numbed before the trial," Isvara said. "Your medic surely has compounds capable of dulling pain. It would have made everything easier for you." "It would have," Daniel agreed. "But it also would have made me exactly like Doran. Fast, confident, and blind to my own damage until it was too late to fix." "But you suffered," Isvara said. "We all saw it. Your face, your hands, the way you struggled through every stage." "I did suffer," Daniel said simply. "That's not the part one was trying to avoid. Pain isn't the enemy. It's a warning system. Hiding it doesn't make you stronger. It just means you stop listening to your own body until it fails completely, all at once, with no warning at all." Isvara was quiet for a long moment, clearly turning the words over carefully. "The Dominion has spent 3 centuries believing the opposite," she finally said. "That removing pain removes weakness." "You didn't remove weakness," Daniel said gently. "You just made it invisible. Doran didn't lose because he was weak. He lost because he couldn't tell when something was already broken." Braxis had approached quietly during the conversation, his expression unreadable as he listened. "The trial's results will be recorded," he said finally, his voice lower than before, stripped of its earlier arrogance. "The Dominion does not go back on the terms of a witnessed contest." "I didn't expect you to," Daniel said, meeting his gaze evenly. "I just wanted your people to see what actually happened, not what you assumed would happen." Braxis said nothing for a long moment, then reached up and touched the old scar along his jaw, the one he had shown off so proudly the day before. His fingers traced its length slowly, and for the first time, something like doubt crossed his face. He turned and walked away without another word, disappearing into the crowd that still lingered near the platform, whispering among themselves about the broadcast already spreading across a dozen worlds. In the days that followed, the human outposts standing among the Concord worlds shifted noticeably. Trade negotiations that had once been slow and dismissive moved with new urgency and respect. Other species, watching the broadcast from their own distant systems, began quietly reaching out to human representatives, curious about a species that had shown weakness openly and won anyway. Within the Red Hari Dominion itself, something slower but no less significant had begun. Reports started circulating among their medical corps, questioning long-buried data about pain-proof soldiers who had died from untreated injuries they never felt coming. Old assumptions, held for centuries without challenge, were being quietly re-examined for the first time. Doran recovered fully within a few weeks, his leg healed under proper treatment, though the experience left a lasting mark on him that had nothing to do with physical scars. He sought out Daniel once during his recovery, finding him in the quiet observation deck overlooking the docking ring. "I didn't know," Doran said simply, standing awkwardly near the doorway. "I didn't know my leg was that badly hurt. I couldn't feel it happening." "I know," Daniel said, without judgment in his voice. "That's not your fault. It's just what your people built you to be." Doran considered this for a long moment. Is it strange, feeling everything? Daniel thought about the question honestly before answering. "Sometimes. But it also means I know exactly where my limits are. That's worth more than never feeling anything at all." Doran nodded slowly, though it was clear the idea would take time to fully settle within him. He left without saying much else, but the conversation stayed with him, a small crack in a belief system that had never once been questioned before. Later that evening, Daniel stood alone on the observation deck, watching the slow movement of distant ships through the docking ring's wide viewport. Priya joined him quietly, leaning against the railing beside him. "You really changed something today," she said. "Not just for us. For them too." Daniel didn't answer right away, still watching the ships drift past in silence. "I didn't do it to change them," he finally said. "I just didn't want to pretend to be something I'm not." Turns out that was enough. Far across the dome, in a quiet corner of the Rethari quarters, Braxis sat alone, running his fingers slowly over the old scar along his jaw, the one he could no longer feel. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he found himself wondering if that had ever truly been something worth being proud of.